A slow pit stop becomes a global scandal. A mechanic's hesitation turns into a supposed conspiracy. Piastri silent, Norris uneasy, McLaren cornered by its own success. And as the footage spreads across the internet, one question dominates: was it failure or betrayal? It began, as many modern scandals do, not with a press conference or a journalist's investigation, but with a shaky mobile phone video. Filmed from the grandstands under the glare of the Marina Bay floodlights, the clip was barely comprehensible, out of focus, unstable, half drowned by the roar of engines. And yet, within those few blurred seconds, the world thought it saw intention. The camera panned to McLaren's garage during Piastri's slow pit stop, catching a single moment where a mechanic appeared to hesitate. He adjusted his grip on the wheel gun, looked left, then reattached the hose. That pause, so ordinary, so human, was enough to light the fuse. Within minutes, the footage had spread beyond the circuit, stripped of context, amplified by the algorithms of outrage. The first wave of reaction was almost mechanical in its own right. Social media accounts reposted the clip under the banner of revelation. Sabotage at McLaren, they claimed. Proof they held Piastri back. The words leaked footage carried a certain magic, the promise of forbidden truth, the illusion of access. The story fed on emotion rather than evidence, and emotion travels faster. By the time McLaren's communications team noticed the video, it had already crossed half the planet, translated, subtitled, and debated in a dozen languages. The garage that had spent 2 years mastering every fraction of a second now found itself powerless against a story moving at the speed of rumor. Inside Woking, the mood shifted from confusion to disbelief. Engineers gathered in front of screens, watching their work reduced to conspiracy theory. Andrea Stella, ever the voice of calm, called an emergency debrief that evening. His message was measured but firm. "We cannot control the noise," he said, "but we can control the truth." He instructed the technical department to dissect every frame of the pit stop, every line of telemetry, every millisecond of data. Within hours, the results were clear. There was no irregularity, no malfunction of intent, no pattern of manipulation. The delay had been caused by a mechanical lock, a heat-induced torque sensor reaction, nothing more. But Stella also knew that the truth, no matter how clear, rarely travels as far as doubt. For Piastri, the situation was as surreal as it was frustrating. He had driven a clean race, followed every instruction, and secured a respectable finish despite the delay. Yet somehow, he had become the unwitting protagonist of a global scandal. When the media cornered him outside the paddock, microphones flashing, he chose the path of restraint. "I trust my team," he said simply. "Things happen in racing." His composure, intended as reassurance, only fueled speculation. Viewers online interpreted it as coded anger, the calm of a man betrayed. In the digital age, sincerity itself can be mistaken for strategy. Lando Norris, too, found himself pulled into the narrative. His own race had been flawless, his pit stop time to perfection. But that perfection became evidence in the eyes of cynics. Commentators began to draw parallels between the two stops, claiming one driver had been favored, the other sacrificed. The irony was cruel. McLaren's greatest strength, its commitment to equality, was now being used to question its honesty. Norris defended his team in every interview, repeating the same sentence with quiet frustration: "There's no sabotage. We win and lose together." Yet in an era where headlines are crafted before quotes are verified, his words were buried beneath speculation. The McLaren communications team responded swiftly, issuing a statement that combined clarity with dignity. "There is no foundation to the claims circulating online," it read. The delay experienced during Oscar's pit stop was purely mechanical. No member of our team acted with negligence or intent. It was a factual statement, carefully worded, but by then, facts had lost their authority. Online platforms that had no obligation to truth continued to spread the edited clip. Every denial became a new talking point. The more McLaren explained, the more some insisted there must be something to hide. Within the factory, the effect was deeply personal. Mechanics who had spent years perfecting their craft suddenly found themselves accused of corruption. One of them, the very man whose image had been misused in the viral clip, received threats on social media. He had made no error, followed procedure precisely, yet strangers now called for his dismissal. Stella intervened directly, shielding his crew from public attention, reminding them that McLaren's strength lay in unity. But even he could not deny the atmosphere of discomfort. Formula One is a sport built on visibility. Now, visibility had become a weapon. For all its drama, the so-called sabotage story revealed something much larger than one incident. It exposed the new fragility of truth in modern Formula One. A team could dominate races, set records, and operate with scientific precision, yet still be undone by a single manipulated image. McLaren's engineers could measure torque, pressure, and temperature down to the decimal, but they could not measure belief. And belief, once lost, cannot be recalibrated by data alone. When a Formula One car enters the pit lane, what follows is not chaos but choreography. A team of 20 mechanics moves with the precision of a single machine, each role rehearsed thousands of times. The timing is mathematical, a human ballet where the difference between triumph and disaster is less than the blink of an eye. At McLaren, that choreography had become a point of pride. Over the past 2 seasons, their pit stops had been among the fastest in the field models of efficiency. But in Singapore, on lap 31, the system faltered. For a team that thrives on precision, it was not simply an error, it was an anomaly demanding explanation. Within hours of the race ending, McLaren's engineers began their forensic analysis. The process was cold, clinical, and utterly devoid of drama. High-speed footage from multiple camera angles was downloaded. Telemetry logs from the car's internal systems were extracted. The pit equipment's digital sensors, which record every rotation, every torque application, every pneumatic pressure spike, were examined line by line. The conclusion was swift and inarguable. The front left wheel nut on Oscar Piastri's MCL39 had partially seized due to microscopic rubber debris fused into its threading. The wheel gun, detecting resistance beyond its safe limit, locked automatically exactly as designed. To the naked eye, it had looked like hesitation. To the data, it was a mechanism doing its job. The torque limiter had engaged to prevent over-rotation and potential cross-threading, a safety feature implemented across all teams after several high-profile incidents years earlier. The gun was reset, the nut released, and the car was safely dispatched. A pit stop that should have lasted 2.5 seconds extended to just over 5. In racing terms, that was the difference between contention and frustration. In media terms, it became a scandal. Andrea Stella, an engineer before he was a team principal, understood both the science and the symbolism. The facts were irrefutable, but the interpretation was emotional. At the next team briefing, he addressed his staff with calm authority. "The car does not lie," he said simply. "Our data tells the truth, even if the world chooses not to hear it." He instructed the analysis team to compile a public technical report, detailing the wheel gun sequence frame by frame. It was a bold move. Few teams exposed that level of internal data, but Stella believed transparency was McLaren's best weapon. When the report was published, it confirmed what the engineers had known all along: no foul play, no manipulation, no evidence of intent. Only machinery, heat, and human procedure working under extreme pressure. Yet the irony was cruel. The more McLaren revealed, the more the conspiracies adapted. Online commentators began dissecting the footage of the wheel gun's motion, claiming the release light flickered at an unnatural moment, proof, they argued, of tampering. It was nonsense, of course. The flicker came from a pit gantry reflection, not the gun itself. But logic had long since surrendered to narrative. The same precision that made McLaren's explanation watertight also made it easy to distort. The team had entered a new kind of competition, not one measured in laps or points, but in credibility. Behind the scenes, McLaren's technical division worked to ensure such a delay could never repeat. The wheel nut design was revised, coated with a new heat-resistant polymer. Pit crews underwent fresh drills focused on response to torque lock events. A full audit of pit lane tools was ordered by Stella himself, who refused to let emotion overshadow engineering. His approach was clinical but deeply human. "We cannot control belief," he told his team, "but we can control performance. That will always be our defense." The heart of the problem lay not in the pit stop itself but in what it represented. In Formula One, machines are supposed to be perfect. When they fail, the failure feels personal. The public, conditioned by the myth of precision, searches for intent where only physics exists. The MCL39, a car built from over 10,000 components, operates in an environment so volatile that a few degrees of temperature can change its behavior entirely. Yet fans, watching from afar, see simplicity: press the button, change the tire, go. They see a pause and assume purpose. They forget that in the world of high-performance engineering, even hesitation has a reason, and that reason is rarely deceit. McLaren's engineers, many of whom had lived through the team's years of struggle and resurgence, took the accusations personally. Their craft, their pride, had been turned into spectacle. To them, the so-called sabotage theory was not insulting for its content but for its ignorance, a refusal to understand what excellence demands. The mechanics who had been filmed in that viral clip carried on working with stoic resolve, but the hurt lingered. They had not only been doubted, they had been misrepresented. In the weeks that followed, McLaren adopted a quiet policy of openness. Technical briefings became more detailed, more educational, explaining to journalists and fans alike the invisible science behind every stop. Stella's intention was not to win an argument but to restore perspective. He knew that Formula One, for all its glamour, depends on the faith of its audience, faith that what happens on track is real, that merit still decides victory. The Singapore pit stop had not broken McLaren's machinery, it had tested that faith. And perhaps, in some small way, it reminded the world that behind every flawless performance lies 1,000 fragile details, each one capable of rewriting history if misunderstood. The aftermath of the Singapore weekend was unlike anything McLaren had faced in years. For a team built on control, order, and measurable perfection, it was chaos of a different kind, intangible, psychological, and far more corrosive. They had faced mechanical failures before, endured tactical errors and strategic miscalculations. But this was different. This time the enemy was perception itself. The rumor of sabotage, born from a shaky clip and inflated by emotion, had outgrown reason. It had become its own truth, and McLaren's engineers, men and women of data and logic, now found themselves defending against ghosts. In the hours following the race, the atmosphere inside the garage had been one of exhaustion mixed with disbelief. Mechanics packed equipment in silence. Normally, victory or defeat carries noise, the buzz of conversation, the clatter of tools, the release of adrenaline. This time, there was none. Each member of the pit crew knew the sequence of events by heart. They had seen the data, they had reviewed the footage, and they understood that nothing unusual had occurred. Yet still, they felt judged. Not by rivals, but by the very fans whose respect they had spent years earning. Andrea Stella walked the floor that evening, pausing to speak quietly with his crew. His words were simple, calm, and deliberate: "We tell the truth with our work. Tomorrow, we start again." It was an engineer's version of reassurance, practical, stoic, unembellished. The following morning brought the first wave of headlines. McLaren divided, Red won. Sabotage shadows Piastri's race, claimed another. The language was theatrical, the speculation relentless. Media outlets that once praised McLaren's transparency now dissected its supposed dysfunction. Stella and Zak Brown faced the cameras, repeating what they had already confirmed internally, that the incident was purely mechanical, that no driver was favored, that trust within the team remained unbroken. But even as they spoke, the tone of the questioning shifted. Reporters were no longer seeking information, they were seeking drama. A glance between two mechanics became a signal. A missing photo became proof. The machinery of narrative had taken over the machinery of truth. Inside McLaren's communications office, the staff worked late into the night drafting statements, correcting inaccuracies, and monitoring public reaction. Their goal was not simply to manage the story but to preserve morale. For the first time in recent memory, McLaren's reputation, once synonymous with integrity, had become a question mark. It was a peculiar irony: the more open they tried to be, the more their openness was doubted. Stella refused to fuel the fire with defensiveness. "We will not shout louder than the noise," he told his senior team. "We will let performance answer." It was a quiet strategy rooted in confidence. But confidence, even when justified, can look like arrogance from the outside. For Piastri, the experience was deeply uncomfortable. His temperament had always been calm, methodical, and understated. Yet now his name was attached to controversy he neither caused nor condoned. He found himself walking a delicate line, showing trust in his team without appearing naive, acknowledging frustration without validating falsehoods. Every word mattered. Every silence was interpreted. When asked whether he believed the rumors, he simply replied, "No. I believe in facts." It was the perfect answer, but in the hyper-emotional world of modern Formula One, reasoned answers rarely satisfy. His quiet professionalism was misread as distance. Some saw in him a hint of disillusionment. In truth, what they were seeing was fatigue, the exhaustion of a man who understood that even honesty needs proof. Lando Norris faced a different strain of scrutiny. For him, the pit stop controversy became a mirror held uncomfortably close. Though he had done nothing wrong, whispers of preferential treatment began to swirl. Fans, once united behind McLaren's resurgence, started to divide into camps. Some framed Norris as the team favorite, others painted Piastri as the quiet rebel standing for fairness. The story had stopped being about machinery altogether, it had become a morality play. Norris, aware of the tension, addressed it head-on. "We are one team," he told reporters. "We don't do politics, we do racing." His tone was firm, but his expression betrayed something else, disappointment that unity had to be defended at all. At the heart of Woking, Stella and Brown made a decision. Rather than retreat behind corporate walls, they invited key journalists to the factory. Cameras filmed the pit crew at work. Data sheets were displayed. The wheel gun responsible for the delay was demonstrated live, showing how its safety system automatically locks under excess torque. It was transparency turned into performance, proof delivered not through words but through demonstration. The message was subtle but unmistakable: this is who we are, this is how we work, and this is the truth. Those who visited left impressed. But the wider world, already captivated by drama, barely noticed. Outrage, it seemed, was louder than evidence. Within the team, however, something changed. The crisis became a form of unity. The engineers, once demoralized by suspicion, found solidarity in defiance. They worked harder, communicated better, and treated the noise outside as white static, irritating, but powerless. Piastri and Norris, after a tense few days, shared a quiet handshake before the next race in Suzuka. There were no cameras, no speeches, no social media posts. Just two drivers acknowledging that they were, in the end, victims of the same storm. That gesture, brief but genuine, meant more to McLaren than any public statement.